There's a heartbreaking truth. Survivors of narcissistic abuse must confront narcissists. Don't just hurt you with what they do. They hurt you by slowly dismantling your sense of self. They don't use chains or violence to control. They use silence, praise, subtle guilt, carefully crafted moments designed to make you doubt your feelings, your memories, even your reality. And that's why the most haunting way to leave a narcissist isn't through a dramatic showdown. It's through calm, quiet, deliberate withdrawal. No pleading, no anger, no emotional fireworks. Just silence. Firm, grounded, unshakable silence. A narcissist doesn't crave closure. They crave reaction. They want an audience. They want applause or tears, anything that proves they still have emotional access to you. So when you walk away like they no longer exist in your emotional world, your silence becomes their deepest fear. A mystery they cannot decode, a control they can't reassert. But to get there, you need clarity. You need to understand the machinery behind their tactics. Narcissists don't love you. They love the image of themselves reflected in your admiration. They crave your attention, not your heart. What looks like connection is actually possession. What looks like love is strategic attachment. In the beginning, they shower you with praise, affection, even obsession. It feels magical, like you found something rare. But what you're experiencing isn't intimacy, it's idealization. You're being placed on a pedestal, not because of who you are, but because of who they want to believe you can become for them. Then comes the devaluation, subtle criticisms, emotional withdrawals, cruel comparisons wrapped in passive aggression. You start wondering, am I too sensitive? Maybe I am the problem. And that's when they know they've gotten inside your head. Here's where you flip the script. You stop reacting. You don't defend. You don't beg. You don't even argue. You simply withdraw the one thing they truly feed on your emotions. They manipulate not because they're strong, but because they've identified that you're empathetic, that you care, that you'll work to fix things. And they exploit that compassion until you don't recognize yourself anymore. But not anymore. You're no longer the supporting character in their drama. You're the author now. And the first line of your new story is silence, not because you have nothing to say, but because they no longer deserve a response. You don't need revenge. You don't need to scream so they understand how much they hurt you. The thing that haunts a narcissist the most is not your rage, but your calm silence. The kind of silence that comes from someone they can no longer control. Because to a narcissist, you're not a person. You're a tool, a talking mirror, reflecting back the grand illusion they've built about themselves. And when you begin to see through that illusion, when you realize the sweet words were just bait, that the care was calculated to keep you under control, the nightmare begins. Not for you, for them. It's not when you cry. It's not when you beg them to change. It's when you stop reacting. When you become quiet, but sharp. Observant, but unshaken. That's the moment they know the game is over. The stage lights go out, and the only one left in the theater is them, face to face with the truth in the dark. Here's the reality. Narcissists aren't afraid of being hated. They live off attention, even negative attention. What they cannot survive is indifference. They need you to explode, to hurt, to write long texts explaining your pain so they can twist your words, blur the lines between right and wrong, and make you question yourself. That's why the more you try to reason, the stronger they become. But when you walk away not in fury, but with clarity, you cut the emotional cord that feeds them. And when there's no more emotion to draw from, they start to collapse. A narcissist has no true identity. They exist by feeding off the energy of others. They need someone to admire them, fear them, react to them to feel real. So when you stop interacting, they don't just lose you, they lose themselves. They no longer know who they are without someone to manipulate, and that terrifies them more than any punishment ever could. From a psychological standpoint, this is clear. The narcissist's ego is a fragile construction, constantly propped up by external validation. Without it, that construction begins to fall apart. And the first person they blame, it's not themselves, it's you. The one who dared to walk away. The one who dared to stop believing in the fantasy they created. And that's the cruel irony. You leave in peace, but in them, something breaks. Quietly, alone. No one sees it except them. A collapse in the dark, where no spotlight can reach, because the light they once had was borrowed from you. Let's be clear, this is not a power game. You're not leaving to win. You're leaving to live. But it's exactly that honesty, that stillness, that refusal to perform that becomes unforgettable to them. Because now, you're no longer the ex. You become the proof that their control has limits. And for someone built on manipulation, nothing is more terrifying. You might think you're simply walking away from a toxic person, but to them, you become an uncontrollable memory, a ghost they can't suppress, a question with no answer. And in the narcissist's world where everything must revolve around them, that is the most devastating blow. Because you didn't just leave, you rose above. And that is what truly haunts them. They might try to replace you with a new supply, but sooner or later, they realize no one reflects them as perfectly as you once did. Because you didn't just give them admiration. You loved with sincerity. You forgave with your heart. You were patient, attentive, hopeful. Not because you were weak, but because you were strong enough to believe in change. And that's what makes you irreplaceable. So even if they pretend to be happier than ever on social media, even if they rush into a staged romance, deep down, they know they've lost the most valuable thing they'll never touch again, a free soul who saw through them and no longer fears them. They fear your eyes, the ones no longer filled with pain, no longer begging for closure, only carrying the calm indifference of someone who has stepped out of the emotional maze they built. Because when you no longer need them to change, no longer need their approval, no longer wait for their apology, you take back control. And for the first time, they are the ones left behind. But don't think for a second that the narcissist will let you go easily. They don't lose quietly. The moment they realize you've seen through them, that you've shut off the supply and are no longer willing to be a pawn in their performance, that's when they shift from charm to warfare. And don't expect a mature goodbye. For them, a breakup is never the end. It's the beginning of a new campaign to regain control. They may send you messages that seem full of regret, bringing up fond memories. They might suddenly become deep, saying things you always wished they'd say. But make no mistake, they don't miss you. They miss the power they had over your emotions. They don't see you as a person. They see you as a system that once responded to their every cue, that once broke when they needed you broken, that once softened just in time to let them back in. You need to understand this is not the moment to waver. This is the moment for precision. You must pull the plug. Shut the stage lights. Because any reaction, whether it's anger or forgiveness, argument or explanation, is an invitation for them to try and reclaim emotional control. And this time, They'll come back more polished, more strategic, because now they've studied your heart. They know your hope. They know you still want to believe they can change. No, do not fall into that trap again. Your departure must come like mist, no fanfare, no explanation, no farewell speech, not because you're weak, but because you've matured. You no longer crave a reasonable ending. You don't need them to understand. You don't need them to acknowledge the pain, because you're not leaving to make them see your suffering. You're leaving because you've awakened. And in that clarity, you realize your silence is your answer. Not because you have nothing to say, but because it's no longer worth saying to someone who refuses to listen. You don't need to prove you were kind. You don't need to convince them that your love was real. You know it was. And to someone who chose to destroy that love, your silence is the loudest declaration, I'm no longer playing this game. Remember, the narcissist doesn't just mourn your absence. They mourn the loss of control. When you stop reacting, you become invisible to them, and that invisibility is a deep cut. Because now, they have no control. You don't cry. You don't beg. You don't need anything from them. And to them, that's unbearable. You might feel tempted. You might hear a voice whisper, just one last message for closure. But ask yourself, has closure ever actually closed anything with them? Or did it always reopen the door for more pain? No. This time, you don't open the door. You lock it. From the inside. Not because you hate them, but because you've chosen to love yourself. Your departure isn't revenge. It's a declaration I no longer live within your definition of me. And that's why you must leave quietly. No status updates, no cryptic goodbye posts, no last emotional appeals, because none of that is necessary. You don't need to share your pain to be understood. You need to protect your peace. And that peace can't exist if even one door remains open to the chaos. You don't owe them a final word. You only owe yourself a clear, clean path forward. One where their shadow no longer trails behind you. One where you don't need permission to breathe. You choose peace, and you protect it at all costs. Have you ever asked yourself, maybe the narcissist doesn't want me to leave because they still love me? That question seemingly born out of compassion, out of a heart that still hopes can be the most dangerous trap in your healing journey. Because if you're still asking that question, it means you're still seeing them through your own eyes, through a heart that knows how to love, forgive, and believe in change. But sadly, you're holding up a clear mirror to a bottomless void. Narcissists don't fear losing you out of love. They fear losing you out of control. The truth isn't gentle, it's raw and cold. They don't cling to you because they value you. They cling to you because you were once the key that made them feel important, made them feel worthy, even if they had to trample over you to get there. Someone who loves you wants you to be happy, even if that happiness no longer includes them. A narcissist, however, can't stand to see you thrive without them. It's not love they feel, it's envy, not because they miss your presence, but because they hate losing their position. You see, you used to orbit their sun, and now you're leaving the gravitational pull that threatens the grand illusion they've built that they are the center of your universe. Have you noticed? They don't reach out when you're broken. They don't call when you're crying because of them, but show them one moment of peace, one moment of strength, one smile on social media, and suddenly they appear again, like they never left. That isn't love. That's panic. Panic that their control is slipping away. What they truly can't stand isn't losing you. It's seeing you no longer need them and yet living better than ever. Narcissists love the reflection. They love how you used to admire them, sacrifice for them, forgive without limits. They love the feeling they got when they were with you, not you. And what terrifies them most is when you reclaim yourself and no longer serve their needs. When your laughter is no longer their doing. When your silence is no longer pain, but clarity. You might wonder if they didn't love me. Why are they so angry that I left? But that anger doesn't come from heartbreak. It comes from entitlement. It's the rage of someone losing their emotional puppet. They're not mourning the person, they're mourning the power. They scream, not because they're sorry, but because there's no one left to play their game. No one left to forgive the same lie again. And that is why you must be strong. You cannot convince them you are worthy of love. You don't need to, because love is not earned through suffering. Love is freedom, and narcissists know nothing of freedom, only control. The more you explain, the more you return. The more you soften, the more you become their proof that they still own a part of you. But when you walk away without needing them to understand, without needing them to say sorry, without needing them to grow, that's when you rewrite the script. And ironically, the more you live in your truth, the more you thrive, the more it shatters them. Because your success whispers the one truth they cannot bear to hear: I loved you once, but I don't need you to live. And that pierces their fragile ego like nothing else. If you've ever sat alone wondering, do they still love me? Remember this: people who love you don't make you ask that question over and over through tears. People who love you don't need to manipulate you to keep you close. They don't shrink you to feel bigger. They don't teach you to doubt yourself and call it complicated love. The reality is they don't want you to leave, not because you're the one, but because you were the best supply. But now, you've woken up. And once you've woken up, you're no longer prey. You're a survivor. You're someone who walks not because they changed, but because you did. You're not a victim. You're a witness. A witness to a truth they never wanted anyone to see, that not only can you live without them, you can rise. And that not any speech, not any final word is what will haunt them for the rest of their life. But do you know what's even more frightening than leaving? It's realizing that even after you've walked away, you still hear their voice in your head. They're no longer outside controlling you, but a version of them has taken root inside, seeded over years of manipulation. It's that voice that makes you second-guess yourself, hesitate before making decisions, feel guilty when you begin to feel happy. It's the eerie sensation of standing in freedom, but still mentally trapped in a cage. And here begins the part of the journey no one warns you about. You don't just have to leave them. You have to learn how to leave behind the version of yourself they programmed you to be. The narcissist may be gone, but the operating system they installed is still quietly running. You catch yourself wondering, am I overreacting when someone disrespects you? You hesitate to speak your mind, afraid of being too much. You try to please everyone, even when it exhausts you. That's not your true self. That's the you that survived them. So, the first step toward real healing isn't forgiving them. It's forgiving yourself. Forgiving the version of you who believed love required sacrifice, who stayed when they should have left, who bent over backward, who stayed silent, who cried in secret, all because you thought that was the right thing to do. Don't be ashamed of that, because what you did wasn't weakness. It was the courage of someone who dared to believe in goodness even in the dark. And now, That same heart is learning to return to itself, learning to love again this time, starting with you. Begin with the smallest shift. Rewrite the story in your head. When you make a mistake, don't call yourself stupid. When you need rest, don't call yourself lazy. When you set boundaries, don't accuse yourself of being selfish. Those voices aren't yours. They were planted by someone who needed you to feel small in order to feel big. Next, learn to say no without apologizing. Choose relationships that make you feel calm, not anxious. Do the things you once gave up just to keep them happy. Learn something new. Visit the places you dreamed of. Connect with people who let you be. And with every step you take, you erase another shadow of their presence. You'll come to realize that real freedom doesn't come the day you block their number. It comes the moment you no longer need their permission to live your truth. It's when you laugh without needing an audience. When you're happy not to prove anything but because you deserve to be. The narcissist may try to hoover, to pull you back with old promises, nostalgic memories, or a brand new role in their performance as the changed person. But you've awakened. You're no longer waiting for closure because you know you are the one who writes the ending. And the ending doesn't need dramatic exits or teary goodbyes. Sometimes, it's just silence. The silence of someone who has woken up, no longer angry, no longer hoping to fix, just grateful for the lesson and brave enough to move on. They may continue living in the same cycles, seeking new supply to patch their emptiness. But you are living a new chapter. One no longer written in fear, but in truth, not in suffering, but in growth. And that is what will make you unforgettable. You don't need to become a perfect version of yourself to be worthy of freedom. You only need to become the truest version of who you are. Because when you live in truth, you begin breaking every chain the narcissist once wrapped around your soul. They manipulated you by making you doubt your emotions, distort your intuition, and believe you had to apologize simply for existing. But now, each time you stand up for yourself, even in the smallest way, you reclaim another inch of the life that was always yours. You begin to understand love shouldn't come with constant sacrifice. Real love doesn't drain you, doesn't demand your trust in exchange for tears, and doesn't make you feel like you're always walking on a tightrope. And the miracle is this: the farther you move away from the narcissist, the closer you get to yourself. You relearn how to listen to your body. You relearn how to trust your intuition. You relearn how to believe that you deserve love without having to perform, endure, or prove anything. You no longer live to be accepted. You no longer suppress your feelings to make others comfortable. You no longer shrink just so others won't feel threatened. And then one day, you realize you don't think about them anymore. You're not waiting for a message. You're not wondering, do they miss me? You're not longing for an explanation or an apology. You need nothing from them because you've found everything within yourself. They no longer haunt you, but you remain a quiet echo in their mind, not because you sought revenge, but because you did what they never could. You healed. You rose, and you began living a life that no longer fits the old script. And then, you step into a new chapter where you're no longer a victim, but a living testimony of your own rebirth. You're no longer begging to be seen, no longer drowning in memories or unanswered questions. Now, you're the one writing the rest of your story with the same hands that once trembled, with a heart that once broke but still chose to love life again. The narcissist may try to return. They might attempt to hoover you back with delayed apologies, manufactured tears, and inflated memories designed to tug at your heartstrings. But this time, you won't fall, because you no longer see them through the lens of hope, but through the light of truth. You realize they didn't love you. They loved the feeling of owning you. You understand that your silence is not submission. It's a declaration that you no longer live in the emotional prison they built for you. That you've walked off their stage not needing a final scene, not needing applause, not needing closure, only peace. That's why you don't need to win against them. You only need to no longer need them. You don't need their understanding. You don't need their remorse. You don't need them to witness your growth. Because you know every single thing they said you couldn't do, you are doing. Every step forward, every genuine laugh, every morning you wake up without anxiety or fear is a victory. A living testament that they no longer hold any power over you. And do you want to know the most ironic part? It's that your quiet freedom, your calm peace that haunts them the most. Because you didn't just leave them. You vanished from their control and still chose to shine brilliantly in your own life. And in the narcissist's world, nothing is more terrifying than a soul they once controlled, now liberated, and never coming back.